Greetings, warm greetings. My name is Esther Stanford-Xosei, and I'm really honoured to be taking part in this GIPRAD, Ghana in Planet Repairs Action Dialogue. I'm thankful to brothers Kobina and Kofi for inviting me to participate in this GIPRAD, as well as Sister Sankofa as well. And I'm thankful to Osei Ajatekpo VII, Paramount Chief of Abatime in the Volta region in Ghana and co-chair of Maatubuntuman Gafrik, for his setting of the scene for GIPRAD. So I have been asked to make a brief presentation on behalf of PRELA, the Planet Repairs Action Learning Educational Revolution, providing an introduction to planet repairs for conscientious dialogue in Pan-African and global justice, internationalist solidarity, meaningfulness. And I'd like to begin by casting our mind back to the independence of Ghana in 1957, particularly as Ghanaians and Pan-Africanists worldwide are getting ready to observe, but also reflect on the meaning of the 66th anniversary of Ghana's independence from Britain. In my view, it's worth revisiting the landmark speech that Asajifo Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, delivered to mark the birth of modern-day Ghana. He told us, at long last, the battle has ended, and thus Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. So it's important to reflect on the meaning of freedom and how freedom itself has continued to be eroded as time has gone on. And what this means for Ghana today, for all of those who consider themselves to be Ghanaians and other Africans in Ghana, as well as outside of Ghana, including those in the diaspora, because of the unfinished legacy of Ghana's true independence. Now, at the climax of his independence speech, President Kwame Nkrumah acknowledged the bigger picture of the moment, declaring, "Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent." President Nkrumah used this independence speech to outline his vision for freedom, freedom from colonialism, but also the true meaning of freedom in terms of the restoration of African sovereignty, and in fact, Pan-African sovereignty. This revolutionary speech contradicted the narrow grounds on which Britain seemed to be recognizing Ghana's independence. President Nkrumah instead sought to prefigure new forms of African identity, of Ghanaian identity, outside of the limitations of European colonialism. He also embraced various other African people who were in Ghana, who contributed to the struggle for Ghana's independence, and also recognized the truism in his statement that unless Ghana's independence was linked up with the total liberation of the African continent, that it would be meaningless. President Nkrumah advocated for a Pan-African Union so that Ghana and other emerging African states would bypass, would actually evolve beyond the colonial borders and therefore no longer be part of perpetrating the legacies of colonialism. That's a lot to reflect upon, especially when we consider that in 2018, the Defence Cooperation Agreement was signed under the leadership of President Nana Akufo-Addo, signed with the United States of America. And the result of this has brought about also the West Africa Logistics Network based at Kotoka International Airport in Accra. This has huge ramifications, especially since we know that US military personnel do not use passports. They are free from boarding and inspection regulations and requirements. And also the US government and its personnel and operatives are able to utilize Ghanaian radio frequencies for free. This is not something that we should underestimate the impact of, especially when we recognize the role of Ghana and indeed the whole of Africa in geopolitics today. Also recognizing that the United States government, who has defined its national interest globally, recognized in the early 2000s that it would need to shift some of its focus in terms of its demand for energy and other mineral resources to West Africa. When we couple that with the fact that we know that Ghana is Africa's largest producer of gold, the second largest producer of cocoa, and also a producer of many other natural resources and minerals that have become commodified, then we should see what is at stake and how that dream of a united Africa and a truly free Africa is one that we still have to fight for. And for me, building on some of the comments made by Osei Ajatekpo VII in relation to where we stand, what's going on in the world, and therefore what role will you in Ghana play in the unfolding configuration of forces? So we're facing huge challenges as an African people, but there are obviously some national or local content or context to these challenges, is in terms of what has been identified as polycrisis, which is where there are interconnected stressors. And this crisis in multiple global systems entangles in ways that significantly degrade not only at Ghanaians' prospects and Africa's prospects, but also degrade humanity's prospects. And these interacting crises produce harms greater than the sum of their individual parts. So interconnected stressors and crises that are environmental, for instance, the climate and ecological crisis, rising sea levels, ocean warming, plankton depletion, overfishing, extreme weather patterns, biodiversity loss, a toxification of all life, ocean acidification, plastics pollution, declining fresh water, water pollution, depleted topsoils, vanishing forests, deforestation, ozone depletion, and not only COVID, but future pandemics. There are the social, such as increasing impoverishment, racisms, including Afrophobia, anti-African prejudice and discrimination, all manner of social injustice, resource scarcity, enforced resource scarcity, refugee crisis, fertility decline in some regions, dysfunctional geopolitics, failing states within and beyond Africa, war and nuclear threats, financial and economic dimensions include inflation, externalizing environmental and social costs, the global debt increasing, so rising indebtedness, unparalleled quantitative easing, inequality that is baked into the global economic, social, political system, legal system, unsustainable economic growth. There are also some technological dimensions, such as uncontrolled technologies, artificial intelligence, biotech, nanotech and robotics, displacement of people by robots, cyber threats, big data threats to democracy, privacy, and our human people's rights. Also, Mother Earth's rights, modification of the human genome, electromagnetic frequency, EMF, that is, pollution. This is what we are faced with as humanity. And this polycrisis is disproportionately impacting us as African people. So Ghana, people of Ghana, it's time to also revisit that mission and that duty to be the change that many of us have continued to be involved in the struggles for emancipation within and beyond Ghana as Pan-Africanists, because we know the hope and the promise that Ghana still holds for all of us. And that moves me on to mention briefly some of the environmentally specific challenges that people in Ghana face. One of those challenges being open defecation. This is extremely prevalent. The burning of used lorry tires to extract copper wires for sale. Inappropriate disposal of plastic bottles and bags. The dismantling and burning of used electronic gadgets to extract valuable metals for sale. Inappropriate human liquid waste disposal. And improper land use in the mining industry, which is polluting not only lands, but our water bodies and and polluting Mother Earth that we all rely on in order to sustain life and the delicate balance thereof between the various ecosystems. So this is some of the context within which I'd now like to go on to explain the meaning of planet repairs. Because going from the disruption of our African sovereignty in Ghana, what that means for the restoration of sovereignty that all African people are seeking, and how we have been interacting with not only ourselves, but our environment, our Mother Earth, and that part of Mother Earth that we have come to call home. So planet repairs is a term that we as African reparationists have been using to describe the fact that what is at stake, what has been harmed, is not only us as people in terms of what we refer to as the Maangamizi, a Kiswahili term that speaks to the intention to destroy our African personhood in order to reduce us to being enslaved peoples and colonized peoples, which relies not only on the destruction of communities and peoplehood and nationhood, our indigeneity, but also the killing of our knowledge systems, the killing of our memories, where we remember who we are and we remember our historic mission and duty, not only to our ancestors, but to those that are yet to be born. So planet repairs is a global imperative, but it's particularly relevant, and this is part of what the dialogue is about. What does planet repairs mean in the context of Ghana? And so this is a definition that has been inspired by the work of African reparationists, in particular in PARCO, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, that myself, brothers Kofi and Kwame are also part of, but also working in alliance with other scholar activists and scholars in the international network of scholars and activists for African reparations. So collectively, we have tried to come up with an explanation of planet repairs. So when safeguarding the rights of past, present, and future generations, there is a need to proceed from a standpoint of pluriversality that highlights the nexus of reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice in articulating the impetus to repair holistically our relationship with and inseparability from Nana Asase, that is Mother Earth, the environment, and the pluriverse, giving due recognition to our indigenous knowledges, in contrast with Western-centric Enlightenment ideals that separated humanity from nature and thereby justified exploitation for capital accumulation. So essentially, planet repairs is this nexus between everything that we identify as reparatory justice, with environmental justice, which again has largely been driven by communities racialized as non-white, particularly emanating from the global south, African people, all other indigenous people, Asian people, etc., etc. But also cognitive justice, because I mentioned the killing of our knowledge systems, which is known as epistemicide, which was part of colonialism. And it is also part of ongoing neo-colonialism, but also coloniality that remains in many of the structures and systems that govern humanity, including African human beings. And so this repair has to be holistic. And since there is no uniform theory or application of theory in terms of praxis of reparations, every people has to rely on their own knowledge systems, their own epistemologies, to be able to frame what reparations mean for them. What is it that has been harmed? What is it that has been damaged? What is it that has been lost? Therefore, if we don't have a full understanding of that, then we don't know what it is that we're repairing and what it is that we need to replace, and replace with what. And that involves going back into our own selves, digging back into the wellspring of our stories, our histories, our her stories, our stories, and removing ourselves from being footnotes in the annals of the stories of those that have colonized us and continue to benefit from our people's dispossession. Now, the cognitive justice is really, really key here as well, because there can be no holistic reparatory justice without global cognitive justice. And the struggle for global justice must also be a struggle for global cognitive justice. And this builds on the notions of ecologies of knowledge, popularized I should say, by Professor de Souza Santos in books such as Epistemologies of the South. And what this means is that we need to radically broaden our understanding of whose knowledge counts and how knowledge is used for the benefit of all, or how knowledge indeed can be misused to the detriment of the majority of humanity, us included. So cognitive justice then is about the right of different forms of knowledge to survive, and survive creatively and sustainably. So this term has been popularized by Professor Shiv Visvanathan, who recognizes that the cognitive justice embraces plurality, which recognizes the diversity of knowledges not only as methods, but as ways of life, and within that knowledge form. So not just the written text, the spoken word, our art, our music, our high culture, our spirituality, our scientific developments, and our creations. Our brother Kofi Mawuli-Klu points out that this includes the repair of knowledges to do justice to every form of knowledge that exists, recognizing that knowledge does not only exist in its European forms, which if we look at why there's even a need for PRALA, the Planet Repairs Action Learning Educational Revolution, it's because of the wide scale miseducation, state-sponsored miseducation that is still based on coloniality, even in our own educational institutions and institutions of higher learning, such as universities in Ghana. Let's look at the curriculum that we are actually getting and how little this embraces notions of African indigenous knowledge systems. And this is a travesty of justice, because people who are supposedly independent must also restore the sovereignty of their own imaginations, so that we are not relying on the relics of colonialism and indeed the neo-colonial educational apparatus that have been left there by our colonizers. So much of the knowledge that we utilize to address our condition, our economics, our education, our sense of development are knowledges that have been prescribed within the realm largely of Euro-literacy. And so this needs to be repaired. Our very knowledge systems need to be repaired as a matter of justice. If not, we'll never be able to attain African reparatory justice. So that's essentially the meaning of planet repairs. And I wanted to just touch on the meaning of conscientious dialogue, taken from that great work of Osajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Conscientism. And essentially, conscientious dialogue is about finding a positive humanist solution to problems of society and acting on them through dialogue, which results in positive action. Essentially, this means that when exploring the role of Ghana, Africans in Ghana, and their role in the unfolding Pan-African liberation struggle, we must look at all the angles. We must recognize contradictions, seek to resolve those contradictions through positive action that moves us and the rest of society forward. It's not just talk for talk's sake. It's not dialogue for the sake of proving oneself right and holding absolutist positions. It's really about how do we bring our minds together, our hearts, our minds, our souls together, so that we can recognize, explore those contradictions, but with a view to resolving contradictions through positive action, so that we can move forward. We continue on that path of Pan-African liberation to its natural conclusion, which we've not yet been able to attain 66 years after the rebirth of the modern day nation of Ghana. So a big part of this is framed within the context of repair, planet repairs, which a key pillar of the planet repairs is the reparatory justice, which is becoming a global concern and topic of discourse amongst African people in Ghana, across Africa, and across the world. And these two images just remind us of some basics, that reparations is about repairs. The internal repairs are the repairs that we still have to make ourselves, the repairs that need to be made in Ghana, within Ghanaian society, between the different social groups in Ghana today. But those repairs have to be premised on stopping any harms that we might be complicit in continuing. The harm of allowing increasing militarization on our motherland. That is a harm. the damage that is being done might not yet be calculable, but certainly will be calculated in terms of our children and our children's children. And then the external repair is what others have an obligation to do to stop being part of the harm and stop being complicit in structures of domination. Imperialism, racial capitalism, continued dispossession, extractivism. And then the other image, repair nation, is reparations. So relevant when thinking about Ghana and the promise of Ghana that was identified by President Nkrumah, Asajifo Kwame Nkrumah, that Ghana would be a meeting place, a place where all the peoples of Africa, including those at home and abroad, could meet in the spirit of conscientious dialogue. And we know that that was also the case in terms of the singing of the two national anthems at Ghana's independence. The first one being, it's been interpreted, focused on those who identified as Ghanaians, but the second rendition of the national anthem at independence was about what this meant for the rest of Africa, the rest of African people, not only those at home in Africa, but those in the diaspora as well. And this brings us to think about contributions that revolutionaries such as Asajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah have made to our struggle, not only for Pan-African liberation, but the essence of that, which is holistic reparatory justice, which some of us would identify as the planet repairs. This quote from Asajifo, made in his 1960 address to the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York in the USA. The great tide of history flows, and as it flows, it carries to the shores of reality the stubborn facts of life and human relations, one with another. One cardinal fact of our time is the momentous impact of Africa's awakening upon the modern world. The flowing tide of African nationalism sweeps everything before it and constitutes a challenge to the colonial powers to make a just restitution for the years of injustice and crimes committed against our continent, a just restitution, restitution being one of the main principles, the 5 principles included in the United Nations guidelines on a right to a remedy and reparation. So restitution is often considered the first or second principle when we think about cessation of violations coming first, stopping the harm, and some of us make number 1 also the assurances of non-repetition. How can we ensure that a coup such as happened in 1966 doesn't happen again when we have invited coup makers to actually take residence in Ghana? And then the notion of restitution, which is often spoken of in terms of the first principle, is highly recognized within the United Nations framework or guidelines and principles on a right to a remedy and reparation. For Ghana, Ghanaians, Africans in Ghana, Pan-Africanists, our allies of conscience worldwide, we are at a crossroads in our story. And we can change the trajectory of what is unfolding on our blessed Nana Asase at this time. So the meaning of African reparations, very quickly, when we in the International Social Movement for African Reparations refer to reparations, we're referring to the harmonization of the meaning and approaches to reparations for African people globally. We cannot allow reparations to become co-opted, to become captured by elites for their own ends. We cannot allow our movements to be captured, to be able to appropriate the righteous and sacred goals and aspirations of our masses in order to benefit a few and to reinforce systems of hegemony that no longer or do not serve our people. Secondly, the reclamation of Africa, including African people's right to belong to Africa. And that includes the right of those within Africa to belong to Africa. So we need to have a borderless Africa, not an Africa that preserves the borders of the 1884-1885 Conference of Berlin, but also the right to reclaim African indigeneity through a process of rematriation as part of building this Pan-African union that many of our great liberators, such as Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, and many others across the continent contributed to. And we refer to that in the ISMA, the International Social Movement for African Reparations, as Maatubuntuman in Ubuntudunia. And I'll go on to explain that in a brief while. And this is premised on forming of what's known as Maatubuntujamas in the diaspora, which are really African heritage communities for national self-determination and substantive African representation in the diaspora that utilize forms of what's called non-territorial autonomy, because we recognize that our homeland, our motherland, Africa, is that territory that we can lay claim to in terms of a right to belong, not a right to possess or own or extract from. And this process of building these satellite communities in the diaspora, known as Maatubuntujamas, happens in link with Sankofa homes, which are also emerging in our motherland, Africa, such as the emerging Sankofa home in Abatime, through the works of Maatubuntuman Gafrik and many others of those of our leaders, traditional leaders, including Osei Ajatekpo VII and others. Third, the pursuit of total African liberation from the Maangamizi, and in particular the Maangamizi of neo-colonial enslavement. 4, effecting and securing planet repairs as the nexus of reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice. Now, all of these are central to the global strategies and tactics of reparationists to effect and secure holistic reparatory justice, which we identify totally as planet repairs. So that the repair of our African selves, the repair of Ghana, as the slogan is now coming out, repair Ghana, that has to be part of a broader repairing of Africa. You can't just repair Ghana in isolation. It has to be part of Africa-wide repairs. And that has to be part of planet-wide repairs. So our repair struggle must catalyze and is catalyzing the repair struggles, movements, processes, strategies, and tactics of all other members of the human family. This is something really, really important to behold and to be part of our story in the making. So this image here just really gives a graphic of this Africa without borders that we refer to as Maatubuntuman. And this Maatubuntuman, which is the name being popularized for this future anti-imperialist, sovereign, Pan-African union of communities, which is a polity of African people's power that is globally super powerful. And it practices Ma'at and Ubuntu in relation to not only her own people, but all of humanity and the cosmos. Maatubuntuman is coined from the conjunction of Ma'at, the holistic justice notion from Kemet, ancient Egypt, with Ubuntu, the Bantu concept of the communion of humanity from Southern Africa. And also Oman, the Akan concept of egalitarian polities from West Africa. So Maatubuntuman is meant to promote the concept of a globally powerful African polity, an Oman, which is an organic embodiment of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian spiritual and ethical concept with multiple meanings, including truth, justice, righteousness, reciprocity, balance, order, and harmony. So this organic embodiment of Ma'at, which practices Ubuntu in relation to her own people, citizens, and the entirety of humanity, Mother Earth, and indeed the pluriverse. So this is what we are aiming for. This is what we are prefiguring. We cannot repair Ghana outside of repairing Africa. And that repair is also about restoring African indigeneity. It's not about repairing borders, countries that have been delineated by our colonizers, but it's repairing our holistic Maatubuntuman peoplehood. And in the Ghanaian context, that means having this Pan-African union or federation. So within Ghana, that would be promoting or restoring Akan nationhood, Beto nationhood, Ga Adangbe nationhood, the Dagomba nationhood, the Dagari nationhood, the Mossi nationhood. That is the renewal of the African indigenous framework, systems, cultures, civilizations that we have been building, but not individually, because Akan nationhood is meaningless outside of recognizing that it's part of Maatubuntuman peoplehood. Otherwise, what we'll end up doing is being divided and ruled and being used once again by our historical and contemporary colonizers, who will fund and supply arms to one people who are seeking to restore their sovereignty against another. So we have to all recognize our right to nationhood within the bigger picture of the emerging Maatubuntuman, which itself cannot exist in a world that is not repairing itself, which is all other people's reparations struggles as part of the People's Reparations International Movement, who are co-creating Ubuntudunia, which is a Nguni term, Ubuntudunia. So Ubuntudunia, really a multipolar, pluriversal world of global justice for all. So that's why we talk about Maatubuntuman in Ubuntudunia, because Maatubuntuman will never exist outside of an Ubuntudunia, because even now, our historical and contemporary oppressors are waging war on our people and dispossessing African people of our lands, of our livelihoods, of our connections to our Earth Mother, right now, happening today, in Ghana, outside of Ghana, across Africa, across the African diaspora, wherever we find ourselves. So that is why we have to have local strategies and tactics where we might be operating within a more local context, or it might be considered a national context, but that recognizing that we have to also be recognizing our global interests geopolitically, and knowing that none of our indigenous nations can survive on their own. It's not possible. So that is how we continue this vision of the meaning of Ghana in the unfolding continued advancement of the African liberation struggle. And these Maatubuntuman, the image on my right, you see the world map connecting these different people groups, because our bloodlines run throughout so many members of the human family, where we have these satellite communities for national self-determination in the diaspora and also substantive representation, but on the continent they're referred to as Sankofa homes. And these communities and these struggles are unfolding right now. This is not far-fetched, because just to give an example of some of those movements and struggles that are going to be made, that are prefiguring Maatubuntuman today, we have the Ablodeduko movement for better Pan-African reparatory justice, self-determination, unification and sovereignty, the Edo People's Movement for the restoration of Benin, the Igbo National Self-Determination Movement, the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, the Niger Delta Sovereignty Movement, the Oduduwa Liberation Movement or Yoruba Self-Determination Movement, the Bunyoro Kitara Kingdom Movement, the Global African Family Reunion International Council, Maatubuntuman Gafrik, the Sahrawi National Liberation Movement, the Kegikani Kweni Movement, the First People of the Kalahari, the Nubian Katala Movement, the Ovaherero and Nama Genocide Redress Movements, that are also especially some of our brothers and sisters, and particularly some of us are working in the UK with our sister Florence Mahupa, really arguing that the repair of Namibia really is about removing those borders that have separated the Ovaherero people from other Ovaherero people, many of whom had to flee into exile, and Nama people fleeing into exile during their genocide. The Marikana Massacre Redress Movement, the Nyasaland Massacre Redress Movement, the Ethiopian Genocide Redress Movements, the Bamileke Genocide Redress Movements, the Oromo Liberation Movement, the Tigrayan Liberation Movements, the Muhimu Kenya Land and Freedom Army Movement, the Maasai Autonomy Movements, the Landless Peoples Movement of Azania and also in Namibia, the Abashwale Base Manjondolo Shack Dwellers Movement in Azania, so-called South Africa, the Affirmative Repositioning Movement in places like Namibia, the Niger Resistance Movement, the People's Union of Cameroon, the Economic Freedom Fighters of Azania, Pan-African Congress of Azania, the People's Land Organization in Malawi, the Togo Resistance Movement. These are just some examples of those groupings, people groupings, African people groupings that are seeking to restore, renew forms of African indigeneity. And it is these Maatubuntuman will be forged out of the success of these movements combined. But if we see ourselves in isolation, we will fail. We will be unviable. But if we see ourselves in relation to this bigger assertion of Maatubuntuman peoplehood, then we have a chance. And this is what many of us are working towards. So repair is also about the rematriation This is something that is very key, that Maatubuntuman has been championing. Rematriation in terms of returning the sacred to the motherland, Mother Earth, returning to the ways of our Mother Earth, our Mother Africa. That's about restoring balance to the world, restoring us as a people to our rightful place in sacred relationship with our ancestral lands, returning to a spiritual way of life, one that lives with reverence for Mother Earth, Mother nature, Nana Asase Ya, and restoring right relationships. The true action of decolonization aimed not just at righting past wrongs, but transforming our collective futures. And I just wanted to highlight some of the women of Ghana who were champions of reparations as rematriation as part of the struggles for independence very quickly. So Ama Nkrumah, one of the few female political activists at the time of Ghanaian independence, she worked with Osajifo, Kwame Nkrumah through Ghana's independence struggle. Ama served in a number of political roles pre and post independence. She was a fearless leader who showed great courage and gave everyone a reason to continue that fight. And there's a quote from her. While I was in jail and the party organization was at its most critical period, I learned that at a rally in Kumasi, a woman party member adopted the name of Ama Nkrumah. Ama being the female equivalent of Kwame, got up on the platform and ended the fiery speech by getting hold of a blade and slashing her face, then smearing the blood over her body. She challenged the men to do likewise in order to show that no sacrifice was too great in their struggle for freedom and independence. This is actually the quote about her. And this is what Osajifo wrote in March 1957 issue of The Crisis, the journal that was founded by W.E.B. Du Bois. Sophia Oboshwe-Doku, who was one of the devoted female activists who played a great role in Ghana's independence movement. She was also the first female parliamentarian in the first parliament of the First Republic of Ghana under the leadership of Osajifo, President Kwame Nkrumah. There's Mabel Dove Dankwa. She was the wife of one of the big six, J.B. Dankwa. She got into politics after Kwame Nkrumah founded the Convention People's Party, the CPP, and she became a member of staff of the Nationalist Accra Evening News, joining the campaign for the end of British rule. She was also the woman organizer for the CPP in the 1954 general elections. And she was the first female member of the Legislative Assembly of the Gold Coast. Rebecca Na-Dede Ayite, also known as Dede Ashikishan, businesswoman, political activist, and definitely into women's empowerment. She was known for her flower business in Accra, and also a chief financier of the then CPP party, and she led CPP women's activities at her home in Kokomole. As a political activist of the CPP, she campaigned and funded some of the work of the CPP party in particular. She's also the woman on Ghana's 50 pesewas coin. Okay. Then there's Agnes Ofowiwa Tago Kwakopeme, one of the women who supported Osajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in the fight for independence. She was also a market trader and a businesswoman at Makola and Okaishi. She became close friends with Osajifo when he had to stay with her for a short time after his arrival from the UK to Ghana to join the United Gold Coast Convention as General Secretary. She became a staunch member of the CPP, and she supported Osajifo by mobilizing the Makola Women Association and generated funds for Nkrumah's independence campaign. And last but not least, these are just some of the women. Of course, there are many others, but these are the ones that have been very well recognized. Hannah Cudjoe was a prominent activist in the 40s and 50s. She was one of the high-profile female nationalists in the independence movement and was the national propaganda secretary for the Convention People's Party. Okay. In March 1948, when the big six of the party were arrested, she raised money and led a campaign for their release. So some of the Ghanaian women who have been champions in reparations as rematriation. And that leads me nicely onto this quote from Professor Molena Korenga, that reparations is a process of the repairing and remaking of a people. That is you as Ghanaians, as Africans in Ghana, the repairing of a people who are in the process and practice of repairing, renewing, and remaking Africa, Ghana, and the world. I've added some stuff there, but really just to amplify this meaning. So reparations is the process of the repairing and remaking of a people who are in the process and practice of repairing, renewing, and remaking Africa, Ghana, and the world. Remember that. Dr. Dati Kumoji, based in Ghana, reminds us that reparations also entails the renewal of ancient and indigenous African knowledge systems of art and symbolism, of language, of music, of philosophy, of science and technology, of spirituality, resulting in Africa, not just Ghana, but Africa redefining its own knowledge systems, and recommending the great work by Nana Kobina Nketiah V, the Omanhene of the Esikado, the British Sekondi traditional area in western region of Ghana, African culture in governance and development. A must text for those of us interested in how do we restore our knowledge systems, our forms of governance, and are based on our African culture, which is still part of the unfinished legacy of our struggle for Pan-African liberation, both in Ghana, across Africa, and across the world. And in my closing, I really want to emphasize the gift that many of our women have contributed, especially recognizing the polycrisis and especially the ecological and climate and environmental dimensions of this crisis that impact our very environment, that which we rely on. So Dr. Catherine Ochonolu has promoted motherism. She argues there is an urgent need for a global philosophy of restoration, one that will bring humanity back into sync with the rest of the ecosystems. The philosophy that will restore this balance is motherism. And Ochonolu defines a motherist as a woman or a man, a builder, a healer, not a destroyer, a co-creator with our God, our creator, a lover of children, who loves and respects all men and women, irrespective of who we are, of our color, our race, our ethnicity, our culture, or indeed our religion. It's a framework with a conscious historical sense. So the mother should be imbued with a deep sense of history, ever poised to question the status quo, ever ready to promote reforms and revolt and revolution when necessary, ever ready to make personal sacrifices for the good of others, Ubuntu. The motherist is an activist who constantly seeks ways of restructuring society for the collective survival of all. This is so because motherism is committed to the survival of our Earth Mother, Nana Saseya. Motherism. And these images are our sister Dedo in Ghana, really promoting the praxis of motherism. Being humanists, being healers, being co-creators, being environmentalists, taking care of our home, that part of Mother Earth that we have come to call home and that we are indigenous to. And the motherist sees the whole of humanity, the whole of not only the universe, but actually the pluriverse and the entire planet as their constituency. And that means we must work in harmony with nature, not against nature. And bringing it right back in terms of a Ghanaian context, in particular, these are Ewe notions of motherism. Miano le miafo. Our mother is waking us up. Mifo atso de miano le efe kesenuota. I'm not sure about my pronunciation, but I've been deprived of my mother tongue, trying to relearn and remember. Let's awake and stand up for our mother and her treasures. Miho fila na miano fezidudu. Let's rise up now for our mother's victory. Our mother's victory. So our sovereignty as Ghanaians, even in terms of our specific nations within that nation state of Ghana and across Africa, is premised on the restoration of the sovereignty of our Nana Asase Ya, the sovereignty of our Earth Mother. Without that being restored, none of us can be guaranteed any type of sovereignty. Professor Wangari Maathai reminded us that we are all Earth's children and that we should treat her as our mother. Today, we are faced with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking so that we as humanity stop threatening our life support system. We are called on to assist our mother, our Nana Asase Ya, to heal her wounds and in the process to heal our own. Indeed, to embrace the whole of creation in all its diversity, beauty, and wonder. And the forces for doing that are here. They are here. And that's why I'm giving thanks for Prela. I'm giving thanks for GIPRAD. I'm giving thanks for the opportunity for us to stimulate some of your own dialogues within the country around your own role in the revolutionary transformation of Ghana, stopping the harms of neo-colonialism that are manifesting in Ghana and those that are manifesting it, but also being part of Ghana repairs, as part of Pan-African repairs, as part of building Maatubuntuman in Ubuntudunia. But the forces that we must rely on, we have to go into our communities, we have to stimulate and regenerate our communities in resistance to the forms of the Maangamizi that remain. And I'd like to close with this quote from Brother Kofi Maoli-Klue, that unless our struggle leads to the Pan-Africanist revolutionary conscientization and mobilization of the broad masses of African people throughout the continent and the diaspora, to achieve first and foremost their definitive emancipation from the impending vestiges of colonialism and the still enslaving bonds of present-day neo-colonialism, to smash the yoke of white racist supremacy and utterly destroy the mental and physical stranglehold of Eurocentrism upon Africans at home and abroad, delinking Africa and Africans from imperialism, we shall have no power to back our claim for restitution or planet repairs, and give us the necessary force of coercion to make the perpetrators of the heinous crimes against us to honour the obligations of even the best fashioned letter and spirit of international law. I give thanks for your attention. Asante sana for your attention. And I hope that we will continue to have some very stimulating dialogue with a view to actually advancing our strategies and tactics in effecting and securing planet repairs. That nexus of reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice in our lifetime.